All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, um, and welcome to this special event. My name is Ariana, and I am a consultant working with Elders Climate Action. And I've had the honor and privilege to help organize a lot of ECA's intergenerational work over the past few years. And this month, ECA is proud to be co-hosting our third annual. We've been doing this 3 years, Intergenerational Month in collaboration with a variety of youth allies across the nation from organizations like Change the Chamber, Lobby for Climate, the Sunrise Movement, Fridays for Future, and so many more. As some of you know, each June we celebrate intergenerational action by highlighting stories and efforts happening across generations. And over the past 6 months, we have met with our youth advisory group to discuss intergenerational action and ultimately develop this two-part roundtable discussion. We hope that you'll be able to join us 2 weeks from today. So mark your calendars on June 25th. Same time, 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll drop a link in the chat to register. That'll be for part 2 of our two-part discussion. And the link should be right in the chat box. Tonight's 90-minute roundtable discussion will dive into what drives us to take climate action, discuss powerful advocacy tactics from different generational perspectives, and offer inspiration for deepening our engagement in climate action while working across generations. We'll hear from our panelists, then that will be followed by some Q&A. So please feel free to add questions for our speakers in the Q&A box. If you go to the very bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A box as well as a chat box. Feel free to use the chat box we're going to have some prompting questions that we'll add in there and ask you as the audience. But specifically for your questions for our panelists and our moderators, please put that in the Q&A so that way we can better track it. We are joined by two moderating participants who will help guide the conversation around our roundtable. So first, I would like to introduce Sarah Hill. Sarah is a non-binary young adult climate activist who is an active leader with Change the Chamber Lobby for Climate, both as a climate fellow and as an outreach and response coordinator. Sarah graduated this past May, congratulations, with their master's in energy and environmental management, earned from an online program through the University of Connecticut. Previously, though, they attended undergraduate classes at UConn's Storrs campus. They finished their bachelor's in environmental studies online in 2021. Sarah has extensive volunteer and work experience already, with all of their experience being in the environmental field and much of it being with nonprofits. And they plan to continue their work, environmental work, now that they are post-grad and stay in that nonprofit sector. So thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. And our second moderator is Catherine Ringham, who is the current leader of our ECA chapter in Twin Cities and is a self-described climate feminist. She is a retired gerontological social worker who worked at the busy intersection of aging, mental health, families, up until 2016 with aging services in Minnesota, including healthcare, caregiving, and hospice care. She has a strong interest and alarm in the climate crisis, which was developed thanks to Al Gore's film An Inconvenient Truth and his climate reality training, resulting in the formation of the ECA chapter in 2020 of Twin Cities. Catherine's other interests include strong volunteer work with ERAMN to pass the Equal Rights Amendment at the state and federal level, and an active role as a grandmother to 5 local grands, and a love of the outdoors with a cabin in northern Minnesota. So I'd first like to ask the moderators to start off with a 1 to 2 minute overview of what led you to climate action and when did you get involved. I will start with Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you for the amazing introductions. So originally what got me passionate about climate action was back when I was in middle school. I became really frustrated with all of the styrofoam lunch trays that my school district used. Not only the school I was in, but every school that the region had. Um, and I knew about how environmentally harmful it was, so I dove into climate action with the support of my dad, who is one of the panelists here today. And I started a petition and got my friends to help out and collected signatures all throughout school. Eventually, I was able to meet with the principal and the waste manager. But at the time, I was an inexperienced middle schooler, so I bought the lie. They told me that it was okay that they used the trays because they burn them. And I did not have a response at the time, but if you know anything about styrofoam, you know that does not make it okay in any way. So I used that as fuel for my college essay in high school, and then sort of for a lot of the activism that I still continue today, even though I was an inexperienced like 12-year-old, I still now look back on it and think, okay, one day we're gonna get the legislation passed through government to ban all styrofoam, not just in that one school. So that's really why I'm here today. Thank
Yeah, I
you.
don't think burning styrofoam's all that great. I will ask Catherine the same question, and then I will pass it over to you both, and maybe Sarah, you could start after that to ask the panelists the same question. Catherine, what drew you into climate action, and how long have you been involved?
Well, yes, thank you. And Sarah, I love that story. And I can just see you as a 12-year-old out there. um, it is a pleasure and an honor to be part of ECA's third year of shining a light on multi-generational work. I'm of the age where I remember the first Earth Day, the creation of the EPA, the passage of some of the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, that era in the 60s and 70s. But really, it wasn't beyond the time when I was in what they call the busy years of working, parenting, caregiving that I had time, had the bandwidth to look at issues such as the climate. But having said that, I was in the 80s involved in an organization in the Twin Cities called Women Against Military Madness, which was involved with an anti-nuclear activities. And I was arrested 3 times at the Honeywell project which was against their nuclear weapons production and specifically cluster bombs, which are now being used in wars around the world still. And a part of that permission to do that came from being a social worker, otherwise known as professional change agents. And then in the fall of 2020, and in that first life-changing year of the pandemic, I met up with Pat Samples, and we decided to co-create the Twin Cities Elders Climate Action with the help of National and, of course, Zoom at that time. We both had studied gerontology, had worked with seniors, and so we entered our retirement years and beyond with just kind of a full steam of the good years that were ahead, and that we knew that that was a really productive time. And with the ECA tagline being for our grandchildren, future generations and all life, it matched well with our ambition to be good ancestors. And currently in our chapter, my role is to coordinate the many moving parts, including monthly protest at Chase Bank, along with Third Act, a monthly postcard writing gathering, and a strong legislative team. And while we support individual and collective actions, the chapter has highlighted the beauty of having a group.
That's amazing. I love your story. It's awesome. I will pass it to Sarah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. So we're going to kick off the panel now. So we're gonna ask this question of all panelists. So maybe starting with Gary, to say what drew you into climate action and how long have you been involved? And then you can take this opportunity just to tell us about your work.
Okay, thank you. In the early 90s, I was in the Foreign Service, State Department Foreign Service. I was serving at the embassy in Panama when I found myself assigned to in Washington to the Bureau of Oceans and Environmental Affairs. And my portfolio included a few transboundary air agreements that we had with the European Office of the UN and something called the Montreal Protocol, which was a treaty to try to ban the use of chlorofluorocarbons, which were destroying the ozone layer. And so that was my sort of climate awakening moment, when I got that job. And we found out that that treaty, the Montreal Protocol, it was a very effective treaty that may have some learning lessons for the Paris Agreement and other global treaties. It actually created a funding mechanism for developing countries. It created a timeline to phase out CFCs and later HCFCs, which are these cooling things that damage the ozone. And as a result, the ozone layer is in good shape and is coming back and will return to full health in a few years. So that was my wake up moment, I guess, on climate. More recently, I've been involved as part of the leadership of the Virginia chapter of Elders Climate Action. We have a 4-person leadership council at ECA Virginia, but we've been involved in things like legislative change, both federally and at the state level. We were all in the General Assembly in Richmond in January to try to push some things that were climate friendly. We've also been involved in some civic action, marches and protests, and I have been involved with another colleague in trying to talk about climate change at middle and high schools locally. So that's sort of what we're up to.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Dr. Hill, or should I say Dad, would you like to share next what drew you into climate action and how long you have been involved?
Sure, I could probably say, well, being Sarah's father drew me into climate action, but um, it's been a journey. So certainly, I, like Catherine, can think back to going to school in the '70s and being aware of Earth Day, being educated about recycling and the environment, but we didn't really hear about climate change until I was much older. And I'm a pulmonologist. That's my full-time job. So clean air is really near and dear to what I work with. Sarah has been an environmentalist for as long as I can remember. And when Sarah was probably in high school, I had an opportunity to give a lecture locally and asked them, should I talk about climate change or should I talk about vaping? And Sarah, of course, said climate change. I should point out to Gary that when Sarah was in 6th grade, Sarah wrote a National History Day paper on the Montreal Protocol. So we've come full circle. But I ended up giving a lecture about climate change and lung health. And it really was an eye-opener to me, how much of a public health crisis this is and how much climate change really is going to affect the air for everyone who breathes. I gave that lecture at my local hospital. I think I've probably given that lecture in a dozen or so other forums since then, including to the American Lung Association, where I am their public policy chair nationally now and soon to be the chair of the national board. But I helped really make the organization focus on climate change as a public health issue. And I think this is where we can open a lot of people's eyes. This is not just about weather changes. It's really about air quality and health, and it's going to affect everyone. So that drew me in. That's how I got involved, and it's made me passionate about it. But I have my kid to thank for it.
How about
Great.
you, Anna? Do you want to go next?
Sure. My name is Anna Mayer. I'm 17 years old and a high school junior at a school called School Without Walls High School in Washington, D.C. I grew up here. I've lived here my whole life. And to answer the question that all panelists are answering about why I got involved in climate action, I would say that it's because I felt like I didn't have a choice. Growing up here, I have had the privilege of looking at political action and seeing the protests and attending those, and my family has been engaged in that. So I got to see how people can engage with the government and can engage with the world around them. And growing up, as I became more and more aware of the danger that we were all in, it felt like I actually had to do something. So the summer of, like, right before my sophomore year of high school, Zoe and I were becoming friends, and we decided to start our school's hub of the Sunrise Movement, which, if you're not familiar, is a nationwide youth-led organization focused on climate justice and mitigating the effects of climate change through grassroots organization and legislation. And the main rhetoric behind the organization is collective liberation, which is the idea that all of the struggles from climate change to racism to environmental inequality are all connected. And the goal behind that is to make sure that our schools and our world is as safe and equitable as possible for everybody. So our work has really centered around our community in that sense. And Zoe can talk a little more about the specifics of that and what it looks like, because we really are in this together and we're super happy to be talking to you about it.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, Zoe, we'd love to hear from you too.
Yes.
Good evening. Yeah, like Anna, I am a junior at School Without Walls in Washington, D.C., but my journey began in California, specifically on the Central Coast, when I experienced wildfires and mudslides in my own backyard. And there were moments when we thought that the whole area that we lived in was going to burn down, the whole city per se. But so from the age 3, people in my classrooms were telling us about how we needed to limit our water use because we were in a drought, and more wildfires were going to come, and when they came, then a mudslide might follow. And they also followed up all of these conversations with, when you grow up, it'll be up to you to continue this fight for climate justice, and when you grow up, you will be able to solve this problem. And moving to DC when I was in middle school, I got to see with my own eyes how public servants and advocacy can actually happen starting at a young age, and how people really do have power in their government more than we know when you're living far away from the nation's capital at times. So when I met Anna and had heard about the Sunrise Movement, we came together to think about how can we make DC public schools a greener place, and start with our own community and then build it up from there. So this past school year, our main focus has been the Green New Deal for schools, and we'll get to talk about that more later. But we've already gotten the chance to pass a resolution in our school board, and now we're working with the city council to transform schools all across DC, and not only make the buildings more sustainable, but also make sure that students understand what the climate crisis is and what power they have in stopping it.
Excellent. Boy, this is great. And I see in the chat too, there's some great contributions on answering that same question. But now I'd like to ask Dr. Hill a question. And it's about how public opinion might, in your opinion, shifted around climate in recent years. And then we'd like to ask the audience the same question. Again, the question is, how do you think public opinion has shifted over the generations, over the years?
Sure. So just speaking from my own personal experience, the first time I remember hearing the words climate change was late 80s, maybe 1989, 1990, when I was in medical school. And, was winter in Philadelphia. And even my initial response was like, the climate's getting warmer. That sounds good. And I really didn't look into the science behind it, what was going on, pay much attention to it. It was kind of a background news story that every time there was an international meeting or some scientific concern, you would hear about. When I had kids, I actually said, I need to learn about this. And I read some books and got alarmed. But it wasn't a nationwide major topic. We weren't seeing it before our own eyes. I think what's happened over the past 10 to 15 years is climate change isn't theoretical to anyone anymore. We're seeing it on a day-to-day basis. When I started giving that lecture that I referenced earlier, talking about climate change and health, I had one slide about wildfires. It was kind of in the background. And I talked about them happening on the West Coast and how smoke could travel, a fair distance. But it wasn't like the last 2 or 3 years where smoke was blanketing the entire country and people were afraid to step out of their houses almost anywhere. So we are no longer in a phase where people can say it's not real, we're making it up. There still is a lot of pushback and denial. I view climate change like a lot of other public health issues where there are people who have competing financial concerns. So in my field, cigarette smoking, there have been similar pushbacks with poor science and propaganda to prevent us from doing the things we need to do. But concentrated education, using science, using facts, and advocacy where we engage across multiple generations changes this. So the public opinion is changing. And the reality is it's what's happening outside with weather, with air quality, with fires, that's making public opinion change. And we can't deny this anymore. So now we get to face up to it and start working on ways we can lessen the damage, mitigate this. And I don't view this as the next generation's work. This is everybody's work.
Definitely. Thank you so much. And Gary, would you like to answer the same question from your own perspective of how public opinion has shifted around climate change or climate in
Yes,
general?
yes, thank you. I would agree with Dr. Hill on everything he said. In my memory, about 25 years ago, climate change was a fringe belief among some scientists and some enlightened politicians like Al Gore. There were, most people didn't know about it, didn't believe in it, and there were a few sort of apostles of this issue. Uh, Now, as the inevitable, the incremental, the undeniable science builds, we face an undeniable and existential change. I'm not going to have a problem. I'll be gone. It's my grandchildren and my children I'm worried about. So now the fringe has shifted to the few climate deniers, whoever they are, who refuse to believe it, refuse to see it. So in a way, I guess what I'd say is the fringe has shifted from a few enlightened, informed scientists and policymakers to those who refuse to accept reality. So it's kind of sad that we are not all in this boat together, but it's a scary future. It's a gloomy future if we don't do something. And sort of that's my view. Sorry, it's the shifts. The fringes have shifted, and we are where we are.
Mhm. Yeah, there's a lot less deniers today, given the weather, and I think the media too has played a role in just taking the science forward, the facts, and even meteorologists seem to have upped their game with relating the weather to climate change frequently. So that's been a big change. Yeah. Sarah, how about you for the next question? How are you using technology for the greatest impact, specifically social media?
Yes, this is a big one, not only for younger generations, but any older person who is engaged on social media. It's a great way to spread education. We do a lot of posts at Change the Chamber, educating about different science reports and even weather events that are happening. But it's also a great way to share actions and spread them completely nationwide. Um, and occasionally you can get footwork done or on the ground work done when specifically what we've done is emailed student groups. We have a coalition with over 100 plus student groups, and we give them the resources and the knowledge they need to be able to go out on their own campus and raise environmental awareness and create their own actions as well as share our actions for the greatest impact. So that's one way, or a number of ways, that social media can be really powerful. Um, but I'd be interested to hear from Anna what you think social media, as well as some other technology, can be useful.
Yeah, so social media has been one of our major tools because so much of our work revolves around mobilizing students. And one of the best way to get the attention of students is through things like Instagram, which is what we mostly use, as well as like word of mouth and iMessage and all of those methods of communication that are very personal and communal centric. And part of the reason that we've been so successful is because of the vast numbers of students that we've been able to organize. For example, at the school board meeting where the resolution that we wrote for the Green New Deal for Schools passed, we brought over 80 people, which the sense we got was that that's more than are usually in that room. And based on the other meetings that we attended, we can attest to that. So everyone was really impressed with that, and that, as well as the previous meetings where we had dozens of people testify, were a main factor in actually getting things done. Similarly, before when we testified before the council, that was also a technique that we used. Our school has been facing a lot of budget cuts, which isn't exactly connected to the Green New Deal for schools, but they do have a lot of similarities in schools not being prioritized by the DC government, which we and all of the hundreds and thousands of DCPS students have issue with. So being able to use social media as a tool to connect to those students across the city and across all of DCPS has been incredibly helpful in mobilizing and working for the cause.
Well, thank you. And I can see how the older generation could learn a lot on the use of social media. I think that's one of the big differences between the olders and the youngers. So food for thought there. Okay, now we're going to turn to Dr. David Hill about, and there was just in the news today about the potential use of AI to aid the climate movement. And what are your thoughts about that? I know you know more than most.
So I should preface this by saying I'm not an AI expert, but being in leadership, I've gotten to learn a lot about it because it's a hot topic now. You can't go on social media or turn on the news or talk to somebody without hearing about AI. And the way I look at artificial intelligence right now, it's a tool. It's a fancier tool than a Google web search, but the AI chatbots we have out there are essentially tools. So I did what any intelligent AI savvy person would do when this question was posed to me. And I went to ChatGPT and to Google Gemini, and I said, answer this question for me, because you use AI. So the areas where AI told me AI could be helpful was in analyzing data. So looking at weather data and energy use data so that we can optimize our use of renewable technologies. In analyzing energy consumption, so we reduce waste, we improve efficiency, we improve logistics when we're delivering products because the transportation section delivers everything and creates a lot of fossil fuel use and pollution. We can use AI to analyze satellite images and find forest fires earlier and identify sea level changes and where they may be impacting populations. We can use AI to design new technologies. So we make our batteries more efficient. We could use it in carbon capture if we want to believe that carbon capture is going to be effective. We can use it to make our climate models more effective and better at predicting the change so that we get a warning of how well we're going to respond or how poorly we're going to respond with changes we make. We can use it as a media tool to raise awareness and for early warning systems for severe weather and other impacts, and to optimize our investments. So there's a lot of ways AI could be useful. I will raise the opposite question of where is AI going to hurt us? So one of the things I say when I talk about this is my biggest fear is not artificial intelligence, but artificial stupidity. And AI can be used by the wrong forces. So one major problem with AI right now is energy consumption. So AI is the Bitcoin of new technology. There is tremendous amount of fossil fuel resources being utilized to power up the AI engines and make them generate information. And currently AI is going to increase our CO2 levels rather than decreasing it. There's also a tremendous concern about AI being used for disinformation. So my field, if I learned anything during the pandemic, is bad facts can go viral, no pun intended. And people who want to fight actions to improve climate change could use AI to get their message out there and to make things look the way they want them to look. There are issues with AI being used for fossil fuel extraction means. So the same thing that could improve technology to control climate change could be used to help get more fossil fuels out of the ground where they need to stay. There's electronic waste, which is another concern with AI. And the final issue with a lot of things becomes one of socioeconomics. Who has access to AI? So AI is expensive. Corporations with more money are going to be able to afford to run the best tools. Countries with more money that may have impacted other countries disproportionately with their own carbon footprints are going to have better access to AI. So those are all the concerns. And I don't take all the credit for this. I give Gemini and ChatGPT good credit for helping answer it for me, and hopefully they didn't burn too much fossil fuel doing that for me.
Yes, exactly. I think that's very interesting, and keeping in mind all the ways technology can help us, but all the ways that we can help ourselves. Gary, and then also Catherine, how can we be most effective offline?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, Gary, you jump in,
Okay,
please.
all right. So there's an axiom called elections have consequences, and it's especially true on climate issues. Um, this problem has a solution, but it needs to be at a scale that only governments can address. Rallies and marches and protests have their place. I've done those, but you need legislative action. The Paris Agreement is the first international binding treaty to address climate change. Uh, President Obama signed us into the Paris Agreement. President Trump took us out of the Paris Agreement. President Biden brought us back in. Elections have consequences. So we need to vote. Voting is incredibly important. You can march, you can write letters, but we need to vote for climate friendly legislators. In my federally speaking, I've talked about, the Paris Agreement and so on. Here in Virginia, where I live, we have a Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, who took us out of something the state legislature had passed called the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI, which is a cap and trade agreement to limit greenhouse gas emissions. Even though the legislature had passed it, it's now in the courts. We don't think he had the legal authority to do that. Now, only a few days ago, he's taken a step to take us out of the Clean Cars Initiative, which would have matched Virginia's clean car emission standards with those of California. And now that we're back at it again. So we've got, thank God, there's only a one-term governor, term in Virginia, but elections have consequences. We need to get young people to vote, older people to vote. We need to vote. We need to keep climate in mind when we go to the polls. The problem is of such a scale that it needs governmental action. So please, that's my call, is vote for the right people.
Good ask, Gary.
Thank you.
And I applaud. I say 3 cheers to your answer, and also 3 cheers to the chat. Thank you for everyone who's contributing to a lively chat over there. Yeah, so this is such a broad question. It's hard to kind of get your arms around it, but I recently had the opportunity to play a little bit with the simulated experience called En-ROADS. And it connects, the problems with the solutions, and then shows you in a visual way the impact. But what it underlined for me is that there's no wrong door with climate change. I think you start where you're at and you go forward. So just to narrow it down a little bit, I'm looking at Al Gore's quote that says, use your voice, use your vote, and use your choices. Katharine Hayhoe also, her primary message in the last few years has been about the first one, which is using your voice just to talk to people about climate change. It's important as a consumer, as a citizen, with your legislators at all levels, to use your voice, to talk to them. There's been a little bit of a spiral of silence around the ability to bring it up in gatherings and certain circumstances. But I think there's an underestimation that people do want to talk about it. They do, love to hear about the solutions that are out there, and also what we're doing, and to act as a role model and a change maker in that way. I echo Gary's ask and plea to certainly vote. And seniors are really that's kind of their superpower. They are the ones who have the highest percentage of voters. Our chapter is going to be taking off in the next week or two on the environmental voting projects postcards, which is based on behavioral science to contact voters who have climate crisis as a priority yet are not rarely or never vote. So that's part of what we're going to do. And then of course the daily choices that we all make and the food we eat, in the clothes we wear, how we get around, do we compost or not, how we heat and cool our homes. Those are all changes that are made within families, and it's a process. So
Yeah.
I think those three are the best ways.
Very important. Thank you for sharing. And I like how that took us down from sort of looking at everyone and then looking more towards the individual. Um, so thinking not only about the individual, but also about overall impact. We heard a little bit about this in Anna and Zoe's introduction, but Anna, could you tell us more about the Green New Deals for school?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Green New Deal for schools is a concept, an idea, a policy. There is no one distinct way. Some people treat it as a law, some people treat it as a resolution, as we did in our case, but the main substance of it is 5 demands that originally was created by the Sunrise Movement and that we have adapted to fit DCPS. Those 5 demands that the whole deal revolves around are sustainable infrastructure in all schools, pathways to green jobs for all DCPS students, comprehensive climate curricula, climate disaster plans to make sure that all students are physically and mentally safe if climate disaster strikes, and free, healthy, and locally sourced meals for all students because that is crucial. And I think that the Green New Deal for Schools is a great illustration of what I was talking about earlier, of how all of these issues intersect. And one of the biggest issues in DCPS is inequality, as it is in many school districts, like schools in Southeast, which is a poorer part of DC, are completely different places from the schools in Ward 3, which is one of the wealthiest places in DC. And we've been able to see through our work the disparities across the city. And our hope with this is that it would make all schools have a universal standard for sustainability and health that is crucial to be fully educated and become global citizens. And in working for the Green New Deal for Schools, we went to, well, first we wrote a resolution with these 5 demands and we made it DC specific. So we took what Sunrise gave us, which was a lot of information about the state of climate justice in the country, and we made it DC specific. We wrote it up, gave it to the school board. We went to 3 State Board of Education meetings with hours and hours of testimony, probably 12 hours of testimony just from students for the whole ordeal. And then they passed it in January. And since then, we've been going to DC council meetings and getting their attention and working with council members to make this into actual legislation that all schools have to abide by. And this summer, I, with the help of our other friends from Sunrise and from School Without Walls, will be writing legislation that we hope to pass in the fall to make this real and concrete in DCPS.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I am so impressed by your energy and your ability to get to these meetings because I know you have a lot of homework, right? And other
Me
things
too,
going on in
me
your
too.
life.
Amazing. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, just overwhelmingly good. So crazy good. But Zoe, I know you have also been very, very involved, and together you're quite a force. But how about answering this question? How can adults and elders serve as allies in this movement? What have been your intergenerational experiences with work challenges that you've had to overcome?
Yeah, definitely. Well, this is our main focus has been on school-based issues. So we've been working hardest to get students behind our demands, right? But at the same time, it's been so crucial to hear the wisdom of adult leaders in the climate community in DC, whether it be people working on council staff, council members themselves, or people with the Sierra Club. And also, it's been really great talking to people with Elders Climate Action and hearing about what they've been up to. And I think that the role that you can play in this, well, first, we have a petition that we've gotten many students around DC to sign, but I think that even having people beyond DC sign it would be really, really beneficial. So I'll send it in the chat in a second. But along with that, I think that being in tune with the students in your communities and seeing what issues they've noticed already, as you know, they are very involved in social media and may know about issues that can seem a little out of the way. Like, for example, we would have never heard about a lot of issues with different schools around the city if we hadn't gone to them and we hadn't talked to the students there. And I think that having open ears, open eyes, and then also being willing to be convinced that something is wrong, even if you've never heard of it before, because that's been one of the challenges for us as we've been approaching council members and State Board of Education representatives is that, you know, they have their own goals, they have their own agendas for the coming year. And for example, this year, the budget has been extremely tight. And adding in all these questions and asks about how can we make DC public schools more sustainable has kind of been at the bottom of their to-do list for a while. But what we've done is we've taken a step back and thought about how our demands coincide with what council members are interested in achieving in this coming year and thinking about where we can meet in the middle. So there's one council member who's already been working on getting free meals for students, and we've advocated to add to all of the legislation that she's already passed a clause to give it a focus on health and sustainability along with just the cost of the meals. And then also talking about the value of having good buildings and engaging climate curricula, because truancy is a huge issue in DC public schools, and thinking about what can keep students coming to the buildings and what makes them feel empowered and feel that they have a purpose coming to school, that they get something out of it, and thinking about how our focus on sustainability can support that. And we've found a lot of success as we've talked to council members and their staffers about this. Of course, we haven't created the legislation yet, but the ideas are flowing and the excitement is growing. And I think that this is something that can definitely happen all over the country. And, you know, talking to your grandkids about what interests them and sharing your wisdom from your experiences, because, you know, like you were on Earth for the first time ever, and we haven't done any of this before. And I think that a lot of the adults that have talked to us as we've gone through this have been very, very helpful as we've figured out what to do when you walk into the council and the State Board of Education, you know, and how all this works. So yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you've had to be really flexible and also, you know, find your way in this. It's pretty amazing. What has a reception been to, you talked a little bit about that, to your interest and your wanting to help shape the bills and things like that in policy?
Yeah, well, we have found that, well, first with the State Board of Education, it's funny because DC isn't a state, but that's still what they call it. At our first meeting, 5 of the representatives out of the 13 were already in support and they signed our pledge. But by the end of the 3rd meeting, they voted unanimously in support of our resolution. And along the way, they did have some questions. They did have some apprehensiveness per se, because they weren't sure. They had their own goals, and they felt that sometimes a focus on the climate could hinder their progress toward those goals. But over time, we talked about where we could meet in the middle. And then going to the council, the main council member for DC, we knew that he'd be a tough nut to crack, you could say, like tough shell to crack, maybe. But either way, it was we thought about what would make him tick. And And by the end, I think that we've been able to get his support along with other council members, but still it's slow going, and I know that the Sierra Club chapter in DC has been doing a lot recently, and they've kind of been forging a path and making the council already start to think about what the climate crisis means for DC citizens. And that has been really helpful for us as we've been adding to their list of ways to make DC a better place.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was
That's
very
great to
complete.
hear.
Yeah. Sarah, I have a question for you, and it has to do with what barriers do you think are there in participating in action that we should be considering? And what barriers have you experienced working with other generations, if any?
Definitely. I know when we were planning for this event, I jumped at answering this question because in the climate space, I don't get to talk about this a lot, but a big part of my life is that I have a rare disease. Um, so accessibility is definitely a big thing. And that's sort of what's nice about the online space is there are a lot of ways to make it accessible. And oftentimes we think accessibility most in-person events, like having good bathrooms is a big one, having medical supplies if anyone needs, emergency sugar for me is always a big one. But accessibility can even be thought of for online events, making sure they're at accessible times for people when people will actually be able to come if they're um important to be at to meet and not just to watch the recording. Um and that can that could be thought of as a barrier to participating with other generations. Sometimes younger generations have their schedules based around when they have classes, versus older generations may operate on a traditional 9 to 5 workday schedule. So that is one barrier, as well as simply reaching both generations if they're in different places or communicating in different ways. It may be hard to get them in the same room at all or listening at the same time. But I think this webinar is one example of that effectively being done. So we know it is possible. But Catherine, I'd like to ask the same question of you. What do you think barriers are to participating in action, and what barriers to participating with other generations?
Yeah, so I have kind of a two-part answer to this. The first one is just within our own chapter. We have found it to be a little bit of a challenge to connect with the youth organizations. Due to some executive director changes, when we were in process of we were trying to set up like coffee conversations with young and old together, and then there was a new executive director. So I think that there are some challenges, but within our chapter we've had ex-teachers and people who worked with children and youth who have been when the pandemic happened, a lot of the environmental clubs within the high schools and junior highs shut down, but they've resurrected that, and there's a lot going on now within the high schools that we're connecting with, and we've done other things. So I will talk about that. But the other part that I looked at was a public opinion poll done by Mark Friedman, who's the co-founder of Code Generate. And I just like to review some of their findings because I think they're quite relevant in terms of the barriers and the positive things of multi-generational interaction. The first thing was that they found a demand and an enthusiasm for cogeneration, that a sizable group of older and younger populations are more than happy and willing to join forces to create a better future. They found that working together helps the generations better understand each other, It enriches the lives of older and younger. It reduces divisions in our society and produces better solutions. And I think it also exposes the older generation to a more diverse population because the younger population is much more diverse. Interestingly, they found that young people, Black and Hispanic people of all ages are especially keen to work across generations. And the fit, as you think about it, is a really powerful one because young people want to learn from older ones and older people want to share what they know, and vice versa. So it works two ways. But the generations focused on different priorities. I thought it was interesting that young people, this opinion survey was in 2022, which dates it, but it, and maybe pointed to the fact that younger people were more, their top priority is mental health. And with the climate anxiety, that was, is certainly part of it. And that with the older generation, starting with Generation X, that they their top priority was the environment. So given these two priorities and the pandemic's toll on loneliness and purposelessness on elders, it's not hard to imagine that olders and youngers could coalesce on mental health issues around climate anxiety, as well as just the climate in general for actions. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And then they labeled some of the challenges. One of them, that it's hard for people to get to know how to start working with another generation because our daily life is so segregated. And it's also restricted by stereotypes that underestimate the old and the young. There might be difficulty communicating with people of different generations, and of course, the differing tech skills and ways to communicate. We live in an adult-centric world, and the adults need to actively listen, create space, and shift the power dynamics to work with youth. Sometimes they kind of take over. And then I think certainly we need more formal opportunities to make coming together much easier. So I think that kind of sums it up for me.
Definitely, I appreciate all of that. I think it's very, you really got to all of the main points.
And the challenges, yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah,
And there are challenges, but we can overcome them, I believe.
right, right. Yeah. Dr. Hill, we're going to pick on you next. And we would love it if you would talk a little bit about the multi-generational health impacts of climate change and how we can best respond to them.
Sure. So, as I said earlier, I view this as a public health issue. I'm going to focus a little on my area of expertise, which is lung disease. But heat alone is deadly. So when we see temperatures above 95 degrees Fahrenheit, death rates rise substantially. So just having it get hot is an issue. But the two major air pollution impacts are particulate pollution, which you see when you burn things, and you also see it when things dry out. So you have dust from desertification, and you have particulates from wildfires, both of which can be deadly, particularly wildfire smoke. And then ozone pollution. So Gary talked about the ozone layer. Ozone is great in the stratosphere. It is not good at ground level. And it's a direct irritant, causes asthma, causes problems for people who have pre-existing lung disease or heart disease. And when we talk about it being multi-generational, it's the people who are most effective are the very young. So young children and kids with developing lungs, and our lungs tend to develop up until about the age of 23, and then it's all downhill. And the elderly. So the two extremes of age are most at risk for this. There are other at-risk groups that we haven't really talked about. So certainly when we talk about climate change and health impacts, we have to talk about equity. So how do we respond to these issues? One is we educate people that this is a health issue. So when my patients come in, I talk about the fact that they can't breathe when it's hot and humid because it's air quality. When the wildfires were burning, I was on my soapbox every day. I had more media appearances than I've had probably in my lifetime because everyone knew they couldn't breathe, and that gets the message out there. But we also have to talk about how we solve it. So electrifying vehicles is great, but the current mode of it does not get the answer to everyone. We need to talk about public transportation. Air pollution disproportionately affects people who live in the inner city and along highway corridors. The health impacts disproportionately affect poorer and minority communities. So as we come up with solutions, we need to make sure they're equitable solutions that are good for everyone. But the messaging has to be, this is about being able to breathe. It's about your health. It's about saving your life. And I agree with Gary, getting out and voting is important. You need to vote like your health and life depend on it. And I'm very nonpartisan about this. It's not who you're voting for based on political party. It's who you're voting for who's going to protect the earth and your breathing and your lifespan. And I want to compliment Zoe on her wisdom. One, you have to find balance when you're applying public policy. You can't go for just the home run wins. Sometimes incremental steps are enough, and they're a step in the right direction. And you also have to build those coalitions that make the change happen. I saw in the comments that industry will push us to take individual actions and shame us for individual actions that contribute to our own carbon footprints. The solution to this isn't based on our individual actions, it's a societal change. But I am an optimist, and I have faith that society is going to make the right decisions in the long run.
Well,
Definitely.
I'm aware. Thank you so much. You really filled in the health end, the important health end of climate, and that's key. I'm aware that we're running a little bit out of time, so I think on the next go round and to finish up, you get to choose which question you want to answer. If you, the two we have remaining is just what tactics you've seen or used that have been effective. What have you found to have the greatest impact? So that question, if you want to answer that one, or simply what gives you hope, or what gives you hope going forward? And Anna, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I guess my answer to the first two questions, which I can answer in one idea, is mass mobilization. I think that showing out in force is the most important thing that we can do as a community. And as I said, we saw that in the work that we did. We were most successful and we got the most compliments and the most press when we brought as many students as possible. And that makes such a large impact. And I think that that connects to what Dr. Hill said about individual actions are important, but what is most important is uplifting the community as a whole, and mass mobilization, in my opinion, is the best way to do that.
Excellent, thank you. How about you, Gary?
Okay, I'll take a crack at in-person gatherings and marches and protests. I think that was one of the questions. I was in the university in the late 1960s when the country seemed to be on fire. The Vietnam War was raging. There was Watergate. We had, Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated. It was just a terrible time. And those marches seemed so important. And I don't minimize that. I've done some myself recently. So they're important. But I think the scale of the problem really needs to be addressed legislatively. Only governments, this problem is so big. The existential threat of climate change is so big that only governments, and governments, not that governments aren't affected by marches and protests, they are. But we need to elect the right people. We need to put an all-court press on legislative and legal action to address this thing. So I'm sorry about the phone in the background. So that's my view on marching and so on. The other question, I guess, was it how do you maintain hope? Catherine, was that still one of the ones, or was that last?
That was, well, we're cutting down, so
Yeah.
you get one.
Okay, that was mine.
Yeah.
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Zoe, you're on.
Well, I can answer what gives me hope. I found that as this is really hopeless issue at times when you look on the news and you see yet another event has happened. But as I've talked to people across the city from many different walks of life, many different backgrounds, and even beyond, and getting to connect with people from around the country with all there's climate action, I know that when you start to talk about this issue, that is what inspires a bit of a fire in the belly of everyone who's excited about seeing how we can work together to think of what can we do as a group and mass mobilize to solve this issue. And I think that the more we talk about it, the more we think about what policies we can change and what power the public has in changing policy. I think that's really a big answer to a lot of this because, we can all go vegetarian or, turn off the water when we brush our teeth and take a short shower. But that at the end of the day, unless every single person is doing it, it's not going to solve the crisis. But by doing our best to come together to think about what we can change as a society could be the answer to all of this. So, yeah.
Zoe, you're so right. So right. Thank you. Wow.
That's great. David, how about you? What are your final thoughts here?
I'm going to go with hope as well. So
Okay.
the young people on this call, particularly my kid, give me hope. I'll tell you that economics gives me hope. It is not going to be feasible to continue the status quo, and it's going to become too expensive to do that. So the reality is industry, which controls so much of what goes on in this country and the world, is going to fall in line because they'll have to. So that actually gives me hope as well. And this change we talked about in public opinion and awareness, it's taken longer than I would like, but there is going to be a major political shift that demands that we make the appropriate changes to mitigate the effects of this. As I said earlier, I remain hopeful. We're only here for one go around. It doesn't pay to be a pessimist.
Sarah, how about you? What are your thoughts on either
Yeah.
best tactics or hope or both?
Yeah, I guess I'll do both. Cause after mentoring at a climate reality training, actually, I'll always think of the question of what gives you hope as what gives you determination. Um, so I think it's tactics such as these, sort of mobilizing people together to um about a common issue that they're passionate about. I think that tactic is most effective. And what gives me not only hope but determination is seeing people just plainly call out the things that we need to be laying some pressure and blame on, like fossil fuels and like inequity. I think that's what I love to see and what gives me hope that we can solve this issue and determination that we will. So Catherine, I guess I'll pose the questions to you too of what tactics do you think are most effective and what gives you hope?
Well, that is a big question, both of those. On the hope question, I had prepared a list of about 10 big ones because I think they're all around us. And I just find hope all over. And I think for all of us who are working towards climate change and a better planet, need a good dose of hope to do the work. So anyway, these are ones I found today that I think are good, that more than 30% of the world's electricity now comes from renewables. How about that successful litigation by the Swiss women in April, and also in the Montana, Our Children's Trust litigation, which voted in or were judged in front that the young people, that they had violated the constitutional rights to a clean and healthful environment. I get inspired in Minneapolis because we were adding bike lanes to all the streets so rapidly, it's just spinning heads. I get excited by the Buy Nothing groups. I think that that's been really, really good. I'm just thrilled with the land acknowledgements, which have become very meaningful and introduced many meetings. which gives recognition and respect to the important role that Indigenous and Native communities have played. I love all of the authors who are writing books about hope, and Paul Hawken, and there's a local woman, Heidi Roop, have books about all the solutions. So I'll stop there, but I just think that we all need hope to go further. And even today, Bill McKibben came out by writing an article about some new numbers that are out that he thinks that we might have started to peak on the fossil fuel use on our planet, that the numbers are looking good. So I think finding those sources of hope, and again, the journalists are on it too. That's been good. Well, I just have to say that I think that seniors are often credited with having wisdom, but everyone here on this panel has showed a lot of wisdom, and especially Zoe and Anna, despite their ages. Wow, I'm really, really so impressed. So this has been great. Sarah, would you like to take a peek at the questions and
Yeah,
see how far we
I'll
can
look
get
at
on
the
those?
Q&A. I think we can start with Zoe and Anna. What is important in this arena to you?
What do you mean by arena? Like the whole genre of the climate issue?
Yeah, I think that's just what it is, the whole climate space.
Well, our first priority is, I believe I can speak for both of us when I say schools, because that is where we right now spend the majority of our time, and we understand what a big impact schools and education has on everybody. Like all of you went to school, everybody on this call went to school, and schools make up the foundation of this country, and we think that that is the best possible place to start in terms of fixing climate change, and then bringing the changes to the communities and to the governments like we agree need to happen.
Here's a really good question from Patrick that he lives in Southern Arizona and is frustrated with the refusal of well-informed environmental friends to stop flying, usually as tourists, given the huge carbon footprint. Do any of us have any suggestions about how to persuade people who know better to give up fun for the sake of the planet and start recreating and vacationing closer to home? Anybody want to take that one on? Any suggestions to convince people?
I'll take a stab. It's an interesting question because it can be hard to get people to change their individual actions sometimes, but I think it's important to remember that our own individual actions do matter. But I think rather than framing it as something that they have to do, try to frame it as something that they get the opportunity to do. So maybe go out and do your own research and find a really cool place that's just nearby that they've never had the chance to explore, but that would be really cool to, and just frame it as an opportunity rather than a requirement. Sometimes that's what people need.
I think there's also an answer here that goes in what realistic expectations can be. So air travel hit a record on Memorial Day weekend, and we're not going to get everyone to stop flying. We need to price carbon into it somehow. And you can also encourage people, if they're truly environmentalists, to purchase appropriate offsets. Now, carbon offsets right now can be a mess. There's a site I use, Climate Stewards USA, that actually offsets carbon by funding projects in the third world. So they'll get people solar stoves so they're not burning fossil fuels, things like that, where you're actually making a meaningful impact. And that may be one way to address this, because it's, again, I think we need to be realistic in the changes we're trying to make individuals to make, because we'll fight a losing battle if we it's one thing if your friends are environmentalists, if they're run-of-the-mill people where this is not their top 1, 2, or 3 concerns now, it's going to be hard to convince them.
Yeah.
I would just add to what, if I may, to what David said. I mean, Yeah, we need to price carbon. Absolutely. That would be a big way to the solution. We can't all be Greta Thunberg, who goes only by ship or by rail to her destinations. That's so admirable, but it's not on an industrial scale of a country like ours, not a realistic alternative. So we need to probably subsidize and invest in, solar and more efficient jet travel. I mean, there are ways to travel on vegetable oil and on solar. I mean, there are ways to do it more cheaply and more efficiently than we do now, and price carbon into the factor. I mean, that's absolutely key. That will level set a lot of things pretty quickly. So.
Definitely. And we got one question in chat. Dr. Hill, can you repeat the carbon offset organization? And I'll type it down as you do.
I think I just put it into chat, I hope.
I had a question about the techniques of Extinction Rebellion. I know they have been one of the more out there on the edge climate activists with throwing things at artwork and things like that. But I know in New York City tomorrow they're having an event, and they've been having a series of events where they are part of but interrupt an Ibsen play of Enemy of the People and come on. And I was just curious about what you think of that kind of tactic, or is there an appetite, do you think, or is that effective to what they're trying to kind of gear some of their actions down? So do you think this is dumbing it down, or any thoughts about that?
I think, in my personal opinion, I can't speak for DCPF Sunrise, but I think that actions like that do have a place. I think that in a lot of ways, from my understanding of how I've worked with Extinction Rebellion, which we have pretty extensively, a lot of their messages are getting across. They are generating anger and emotion. And I think that that is one of the most important things in activism. That said, for the goals that we're trying to achieve, that is absolutely not the best way for us to go about it. I think a big theme of this panel has been changes in government. And if you throw paint at government buildings, like, they're not going to listen to you. So I think there is a place in the climate justice community for actions like that of Extinction Rebellion, and also for communal and more like peaceful, not that theirs aren't peaceful, but less disruptive events and actions that have large consequences as well.
Thank you.
I think we're handing it back to Ariana now.
Thank you so much. We're going to get our action party started in just a second, but I would like to first say thank you so much to our panelists and the elders and youth allies who took the time to plan this month's events. So many hours over the last 6 months, and especially a huge thank you to our moderators, Sarah and Catherine, for doing such a lovely job tonight. Please show them some love in the chat box if you haven't already. And if you didn't get a chance to listen to the Way Forward Regenerative Conversation podcast, it features our very own moderator, Sarah Hill, and their colleague and our moderator on our next session, Tony Passano from Change the Chamber. You can listen to it anywhere you get podcasts, or you can also find it on YouTube. So we'll drop those links in the chat. Tomorrow, you will receive a follow-up email with the recording and links from this call. And don't forget to join us here, like I said, in 2 weeks on June 25th for part 2 of our series. The registration link for part 2 will be in the chat. Like I said, we'll have Tony Passano, who you can hear on that regenerative podcast, moderating, as well as our very own Hazel Chandler. So let's get our action party started. In just a moment, we will invite Matthew Valtraw from the Climate Action Now app, and we will be using the Climate Action Now app, which you can find on your phone or tablet, to take actions on a variety of climate-related topics related to tonight's call for our action. We'll also have a number of actions that we will be dropping in the chat box that do not require the CAN app that you can do from your computer. There will be different actions coming through the chat and CAN app both. So keep an eye on the chat, but also listen to Matthew, I will turn it over to him. Thank you all.
Hello, everybody. Okay, so for anybody who's been to one of these little mini action parties before, you know the drill. I'm going to share my screen here, put up a QR code, which is this funny looking box on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you scan that QR code with your phone or your tablet, it will take you to the actions that we have prepared tonight. So if you're unfamiliar with QR codes, you just take out your phone, open your camera, whatever you use to take pictures, point it right at that box on your screen, and wait for a little yellow bubble to pop up that says Climate Action Now. Click on the little yellow bubble. It will take you to the App Store to download the app if you don't have this app already. And if you do, it will take you right into the actions for intergenerational climate action. And I love to see that somebody is already on and up and running and took their first action. As folks get going here, we'll see on the left-hand side, our little blue marble is going to start filling up with numbers, and we're going to try to get to 300 in 15 minutes here. That's pretty ambitious. We might need to keep this going until tomorrow to get to 300, but that's our goal. That's our aim. Let's see if we can get to 300 actions either tonight or in the next few days. So as you get onto the actions, hopefully you'll see that many of them are Elders Climate Action actions. They'll have the Elders Climate Action label on them, and that means that they were created by an Elders Climate Action person. So Bill Murphy, Dr. Marianne Krasny at Cornell, Frances Stewart. She's probably a familiar face to many of you, familiar name. All of them and more ECA members have created tons of actions for the app. So since this was sort of an intergenerational theme, I just thought I'd collect all those actions together for everyone to take tonight. And I also put in all the actions I could find that had to do with youth activism or schools or education or anything like that. So I tried to get the ECA actions mixed with all of the sort of youth activism actions that we had. So should be a grab bag of those. And if anybody, by the way, is having trouble with the QR code, any technical difficulties, don't let that stop you. We have lots of ways to get you up and running if the QR code isn't working for you. So just let me know in the chat, and I will try to suggest some alternative strategies to make sure that everybody is able to take action tonight. But with that, I think I will take down my screen here, and I feel like it'd be great to just continue the kind of the Q&A here. Usually I just like talk for 15 minutes and do a little routine, but I feel like we've got all these awesome people here. Let's just keep the conversation going. So does anybody have any other questions for the panel? Not, I can throw out a few questions to get us started, but I feel like it'd be great to just keep doing what we were doing here.
Can I just say briefly that, Matthew, this Climate Action Now app is an astonishing tool. It really is. I've been using it for a couple of years. You can be an armchair activist every morning, 4 or 5 actions. It's ridiculously easy, and it reaches the whole panoply of state, federal, local officials. So it's wonderful. So I really encourage those of you who don't use it to start using it. It's fabulous.
Thank you for that plug. Appreciate that.
The other thing I'll throw out here.
On my phone here doing.
Yep, I'm going to throw out here. Doing a lot of policy work is people ask me, does this work? And I will tell you that congressional offices pay attention to the emails they're getting and the number on a topic, and they will act based on that. They'll hear the public pressure. Phone calls sometimes work better than emails when you're making a personal contact, but all of these actions count. They pay attention. They know what people are talking about. They talk to their colleagues. They feel the pressure. So this is really democracy in action.
Wow. Yeah, that's cool to hear. And we've definitely just want to reinforce that. We've seen that happen as well. Definitely. It's sometimes hard to draw a direct line between like, you send a letter or one group of people takes action and something changes. But we've heard over and over again, yeah, like, when we've worked with groups like Beyond Plastics in New York, they had a bunch of lobby days in New York recently, and they literally were there lobbying the legislators while we were on a Zoom sending messages. And what they said is like, this is when we go into that meeting, we get to say, they brought the goal tracker into their meeting, right? They said, look at how many people want you to pass this bill. And it was like, they said literally like as the antidote to all of the fossil fuel lobbyists that were there. It's like the fossil fuels had, money and all this pressure, but they had, 3,000 people, 3,001, 3,002, they had real people that wanted this passed. So kind of another way I've heard it referred to is like the inside game and the outside game. The inside game is, people actually going and lobbying legislators, boots on the ground, and the outside game is us, is sending in letters, and we need both. We need the people showing up at the Capitol buildings, and we need the letters coming in, and that really is, I think, the 1-2 punch that makes change.
Yeah, Matthew, when a group of us from the Virginia ECA chapter went down to Richmond in January to the Virginia General Assembly, that's when they meet and their legislative session happens. We went in to meet with a delegate in the Senate. They said, "Oh, you're the one sending all those messages." I mean, they get them, they read them, it impacts. So let me tell you, it doesn't go into the ether. These people see it. It hits home. So use the app every day. It's fantastic.
That's great. That's what a perfect segue. So I had a question for anybody on the panel who wants to answer it, and it's a super broad question, but it's just one of those questions that everybody's perspective on it is always fascinating and enlightening to me, which is what do you find is the most effective what are some of the most effective things that we can do as advocates? Is it, sending letters? Is it showing up in person? Is it, should we do it sort of with anger? Should we do it with, some other tone? Like, what are the sort of things that you guys have found that work, that are convincing, that actually make a difference when it comes to activism? What are the ways of doing it that you found are most effective? Localized action, I see in the chat. Yes, the more local, the better. That's great.
Yeah. Well, I can go first.
Yeah.
I found in my neighborhood, aside from like working with students
Mhm.
and also working with students, going in person and talking to people in real time. Like before we ever testified in front of the council, we went around to all the offices and talked to people and like their staff members, and we were showing that we're real human beings and we're students that were there to talk. And we weren't going with like oh, I'm right, you're wrong, shut up, like
Mhm.
listen to what we have to say, but just here's who we are and this is what we're asking for. And then also I know that Anna and a few other students really led the way in going to schools across the city and talking to students and seeing what they were interested in and seeing their buildings in real life and what needed to be done. And then in my neighborhood, I've been able to connect with a lot of elders, and we have created this group that has a motto of think globally, act locally. So it's, we've talked about ECA and third act, but the goal really is to just come together as a community and think about how we can, in our neighborhood, make it a more sustainable place and think about how we can be citizens that help one another in the face of the climate crisis. And I think that really just being patient and hearing where people are coming from and listening to their stories, just like we did tonight, is really the most powerful way to connect with people on a deeper level and make them want to go to their own communities and to spread the word and to continue communicating their messages.
Awesome.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. And another thing I think that we've emphasized a little, but is always good to emphasize again is working across party lines. We all live on this planet. It doesn't matter what, it shouldn't matter what our politics are. The climate should be important to all of us because this is
Right.
where we live.
Right. I know we've had success partnering with other like organizations, so we don't feel like we're reinventing the wheel if someone else is already doing something, and the synergy
Yeah.
working with other organizations just makes a lot of sense. So figuring out, our priorities. And then we've also strived for a really bipartisan approach. Our legislative team, for instance, has set up numerous one-to-one meetings with representatives and making sure we get someone in their district who can talk. And to try to set up some sort of a Republican caucus was kind of cool. But I think just that being able to work really well with the system that is already there, knowing the lay of the land of where you live.
Right.
But yeah, I think everyone's a big fan of thinking globally, but acting locally.
I think a lot of success comes from good storytelling. So meeting with decision makers, whether it's politicians or school board members who might be politicians or business leaders, having somebody who can make the story personal as opposed to simply I'm worried about climate change, but I've been personally affected by this. This has affected my health or my house or my family. We're all listeners, and making it personal tends to drive the message home. Even these actions, when you're taking them, if you can take the extra step to personalize the message, it makes it more meaningful.
Totally. How about like a couple things jumping off what you guys said. First of all, do you find that you have to message differently, or is that something you do intentionally, like different messaging for different political leanings? Do you spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to phrase things not in terms of climate, not in terms of the environment, but in terms of like jobs and like is that something you guys think a lot about, or do you find that just sort of being real and phrasing things however you would normally phrase it as the person that you are is the most effective way to do it?
Well, Matthew, if you're talking about the Climate Action Now app, I don't feel the need really to edit or customize much. Those messages are quite, once you upload your, I'm a grandfather worried about a warming world for my children and grandchildren, that sort of sets the stage. I delight in sending those to my Republican governor and so on. But when I send to my local Congressman Don Beyer, who's a climate-friendly Democrat, I mean, he likes getting these things. He responds to them. He's active on climate anyway, and so I don't feel the need to sort of mess around, if you will, with what you've got going in that app is really pretty on spot on. I mean, you're allowed to customize it, but I don't feel the need to do much of that. It's really quite fine tuned to what we need to do, I think.
Well, that's good to hear, because that is something we think a lot about and worry a lot about. Is like, okay, we're sending. What's Rod DeSantis actually gonna think of any of this? But who cares, right?
So I think when I'm talking to individuals, I may change how I'm approaching things, and I look at this, professionally when I talk about smoking cessation. There's some people who just don't want to hear it, and you choose your battles, and I don't waste my time. Get the message out, and the conversation's over. There's other people where you can get to a back and forth, even if they were resistant to begin with. So you have to make sure you have an audience that is somewhat receptive. But once you have that, those of us on this panel, it's easy. We don't have to convince each other at all. I'd be, really wasting my time having a conversation with Sarah asking them to be more concerned about the environment. We
Right.
might brainstorm and work together, but it's the people who are uncertain or who say, I don't know what to believe because, I listen to certain news stations that say this isn't real. There are some people who you can convince and bring over to the side of truth and science.
Absolutely. Just one thing to mention real quick here. For some reason, it's like the goal tracker is wedged, but we know that there are way more than 63 actions that have been taken. We're certainly in the hundreds. So thank you all for doing that, and we'll have to look into why the the tracker is malfunctioning here. Leslie tells me she did 85 actions just now, so thank you, Leslie. Another wonderful Climate Action Now ECA crossover person. So yeah, but
You didn't mention it, I don't think, but for those who use the app a lot, you can plant a tree. I mean, there are rewards. By using actions, you get green rewards that are meaningful.
that is true. That is very true. Yeah. So every, I think 3,000 points, and an action is like 100 to 200 points. Every 3,000 points we plant a tree. On your behalf. Many people who are active users of the app, many people on this call have several hundred trees to their name already. So it's a fun little way to have an even more impact while you're having an impact.
Create a carbon sink, right?
Yeah,
I'm gonna
exactly.
jump in real quick because we are at the half hour. And that means we have already spent 90 lovely minutes together. So I would like to thank everyone here for all the audience for joining us, all of the panelists and moderators. This was such a lovely event and such a lovely discussion. Thank you so much. And we will be sending that recording and follow-up email tomorrow.
Thank you,
Thank
Ariana.
Thank
you.
you all, and thank you.
Well, thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you, Sarah, for being a great co-moderator. This was been fun and so great to be with all of you. I so appreciate your good words and just your thoughtfulness and your articulateness. Amazing. So thank you. And thanks for the climate action part two. I know one of the hard things is to activate people, and that's why I always suggest number one, it's the easiest way to get started if you're not sure how you can make an impact. So thank you.
Good night.
Have a good
Good
night.
night.
everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.